You've seen it happen. Someone walks into a room and without saying a single word, every conversation shifts toward them. Not the loudest person, not the one demanding attention, but the executive whose silent presence makes boardroom arguments dissolve instantly, or that individual at parties who becomes the gravitational center while barely speaking. This isn't charisma as most people understand it. It's something far more precise and infinitely more powerful. The ancient Egyptians had a term for this phenomenon. Their god of wisdom and hidden knowledge understood what modern psychology is only beginning to rediscover. True influence operates through atmospheric control, the ability to alter the emotional climate of any space you enter. Most people spend their lives performing power-raising voices, making demands, trying to dominate through force. But the most dangerous kind of influence is the one no one can trace back to you. It feels natural, inevitable, like gravity itself is bending in your direction. This isn't mystical thinking. It's a precise psychological skill set that operates through specific, learnable mechanisms. In the shadowed halls of ancient Egyptian temples, scribes carved hieroglyphs that told of Thoth, the ibis-headed god who held dominion over wisdom, writing, and the very fabric of reality itself. But there's something they understood about Thoth that modern interpretations completely miss. The ancient Egyptians didn't revere him simply because he possessed knowledge. They feared and respected him because he understood that true power lies not in what you reveal, but in what you deliberately withhold. Think about the ibis for a moment. This isn't some random bird the Egyptians slapped onto a god's shoulders. The ibis is a creature of calculated mystery. It stands motionless in shallow waters, its thoughts completely unreadable, until it strikes with surgical precision. The Egyptians chose this symbol because they recognized something profound. The most dangerous predators are the ones you cannot predict. Thoth's first law operates on a principle that cuts against everything you've been taught about communication and influence. You've been conditioned to believe that clarity equals power, that transparency builds trust, that the more you share, the more people will connect with you. This is exactly backwards, and it's keeping you powerless. Here's what actually happens when you become an open book. People stop thinking about you the moment you leave the room. When someone can categorize you completely, when they understand your patterns, your motivations, your likely responses, you become background noise in their mental landscape. You've solved the puzzle of yourself for them, and solved puzzles get discarded. But strategic opacity, that's different. That creates what psychologists call the Zeigarnik effect, the human mind's obsession with unfinished business. When someone cannot fully decode you, when pieces of your puzzle remain missing, you occupy premium real estate in their consciousness. They think about you during quiet moments. They replay your conversations, searching for clues. They project their own fears, desires, and assumptions onto the spaces you've left blank. Watch how this plays out in the corporate world. The most influential executives aren't the ones who explain everything in exhaustive detail. They're the ones who speak in measured, incomplete thoughts that force others to fill in the gaps. When asked about quarterly projections, they might say, "The numbers are interesting. There are patterns emerging that remind me of 2018, though the variables are different now." Then they pause. They let that hang in the air while everyone else scrambles to decode what they really mean. This isn't accidental. It's strategic opacity in action. Or consider the person who's genuinely magnetic in social situations. They don't dominate conversations with endless stories about themselves. Instead, they reveal just enough to seem accessible, while maintaining layers that others cannot penetrate. When someone asks about their weekend, they might respond, "I had one of those conversations that changes how you see everything." You know how that is. Notice what happens here. They've shared an experience without sharing the experience. They've created intimacy without vulnerability. The psychological mechanism behind this is hardwired into human nature. We are pattern-seeking creatures. Our survival once depended on our ability to predict the behavior of others, friend or foe, trustworthy or dangerous. When we encounter someone who defies easy categorization, our ancient programming kicks into overdrive. We become obsessed with solving the puzzle they represent. This is why predictability is the enemy of influence. The moment people can anticipate your reactions, predict your opinions, or forecast your next move, your power over their attention evaporates. You become furniture in their mental space, useful perhaps, but unremarkable. Strategic opacity operates through specific techniques that you can master. The strategic pause, for instance. When someone asks you a direct question, instead of rushing to fill the silence with information, you pause. You let them sit with the weight of their own question. Often they'll start talking again, revealing far more about their motivations than your immediate answer ever could. there's the incomplete revelation. I learned something about human nature yesterday that I'm still processing. It explains so much about why people. And then you trail off, lost in thought. The person you're speaking with will inevitably press for details, positioning themselves as the seeker while you become the keeper of hidden knowledge. Then there's the redirect that never quite answers the original question. Someone asks what you do for work, and you respond, "I solve problems that most people don't realize they have." What about you? Do you enjoy what you do, or do you do it because you're good at it? You've shifted the dynamic entirely. They're now revealing themselves while you remain an enigma. This isn't about being dishonest or manipulative. It's about understanding that clarity is not always power. Sometimes, the most influential position is the one that cannot be pinned down. When Steve Jobs unveiled Apple products, he didn't explain every feature and specification. He created anticipation through strategic withholding. One more thing, he would say, having already demonstrated mastery over his audience's attention through calculated mystery. Historical leaders understood this instinctively. Churchill's wartime speeches were masterclasses in strategic opacity. He spoke of determination and sacrifice without detailing specific military strategies. He created unity through shared mystery rather than shared information. People followed him not because they understood his complete plan, but because his measured ambiguity suggested depths of wisdom they couldn't fathom. You can begin practicing this immediately. The next time someone asks you a personal question, resist the urge to provide a complete answer. Share a fragment, leave them curious. When colleagues want to know your opinion on a controversial topic, respond with a question that reveals your depth of thinking without exposing your position. What do you think drives people to feel so strongly about that? Start speaking in incomplete thoughts occasionally. Let your voice trail off as if you're contemplating something profound. Watch how people lean in, how they start filling the silence with their own interpretations and projections. The goal isn't to become mysterious for mystery's sake. It's to understand that in a world where everyone overshares, where people broadcast their every thought and feeling, the person who maintains strategic opacity becomes magnetic by contrast. You become the puzzle everyone wants to solve, the book everyone wants to read, the mind everyone wants to understand. Thoth knew that knowledge without mystery is just information. But knowledge wrapped in strategic opacity, that becomes power, that becomes influence, that becomes an aura so compelling that people bend toward you without understanding why. In the hieroglyphs carved into the walls of ancient temples, Thoth appears in countless forms. One moment he's depicted as an ibis, his curved beak piercing through the veil between worlds. The next, he's a baboon sitting in judgment of human souls. Sometimes he's shown as a man with the head of an ibis, holding the reed pen that records the fate of mortals. But here's what the archaeologists and Egyptologists miss when they catalogue these images as mere artistic variation. Thoth's shape-shifting wasn't just symbolic mythology. It was a psychological technology. The ancient Egyptians understood something about power that we've forgotten in our age of personal branding and consistent messaging. They knew that the moment someone believes they have you figured out, they've already begun the process of dismissing you. Thoth's power didn't come from being predictable or reliable in the way we think of those qualities today. His power came from being impossible to categorize, impossible to predict, and therefore impossible to manipulate. Think about the people in your life who hold real influence over you. Not the ones who demand respect through titles or volume, but the ones who genuinely command it. If you examine them closely, you'll notice something unsettling. You can never quite pin them down. Just when you think you understand their pattern, they shift. The boss who's warm and collaborative in Monday's meeting becomes coolly analytical by Wednesday. The friend who texts you constantly for 2 weeks suddenly becomes mysteriously unavailable. The romantic interest who seemed intensely focused on you last month now appears distracted by other priorities. Your brain hates this. Neuroscientists have discovered that our minds are constantly running predictive algorithms, trying to anticipate threats and opportunities in our environment. When someone's behavior follows a clear pattern, your subconscious files them away in a neat category and stops paying close attention. But when someone defies categorization, your brain maintains what researchers call heightened vigilant attention. You literally cannot stop thinking about them because your mind cannot solve the puzzle they represent. This is the metamorphosis principle in action, and it's been hiding in plain sight throughout history. Consider how Franklin Roosevelt managed to maintain political power for over a decade. His opponents could never develop an effective strategy against him because he refused to be ideologically consistent in the way they expected. He championed progressive social programs while simultaneously courting conservative business interests. He'd present himself as a man of the people while displaying aristocratic sophistication. His enemies spent their energy preparing for battles against a version of Roosevelt that no longer existed by the time they launched their attacks. Now, before you misunderstand this principle, let me be clear about what this isn't. This isn't about being erratic, unreliable, or dishonest. Random behavior doesn't create power, it creates chaos. The key distinction lies in understanding that strategic metamorphosis maintains a consistent core while varying the external expression. Water provides the perfect metaphor here. Water takes the shape of any container it encounters, yet it never stops being water. It can be gentle enough to nourish or powerful enough to carve through mountains, but its essential nature remains unchanged. When you master the metamorphosis principle, you're not changing who you are, you're revealing different facets of your complete self strategically. Most people show the same, narrow slice of their personality in every interaction. They become predictable, and predictable people become invisible. But when you consciously vary your approach, you force others to pay attention because they can never assume they know what's coming next. Let me give you some specific strategies for implementing this. The first is what I call the temperature shift. In one interaction, you might be warm, engaging, and personally interested in someone's projects. In the next encounter, you're professional, focused, and businesslike. You're not being fake in either situation. You're simply choosing which aspect of your personality to emphasize. The person on the receiving end can't settle into a comfortable routine of expecting a certain type of interaction with you. The second strategy is availability fluctuation. For a period, you might be highly responsive to calls, texts, and meeting requests. Then you become genuinely busy with other priorities and less immediately available. Again, this isn't about playing games or being manipulative. It's about reflecting the natural rhythm of a person who has multiple important focuses in their life, rather than someone whose availability is constant and therefore taken for granted. The third technique is interest oscillation. You might show intense focus on someone's ideas during one conversation, asking detailed questions and offering valuable insights. Later, you might seem more preoccupied with your own projects, listening politely but not engaging with the same level of enthusiasm. This isn't rudeness, it's the natural behavior of someone whose mental energy is distributed across various priorities rather than being constantly available to others. I watched this principle play out dramatically in a business negotiation last year. The lead negotiator from the other side had clearly studied our company's previous deals and prepared for what he expected would be a straightforward discussion. But instead of following our usual pattern of opening with numbers and working toward compromise, we began by discussing industry philosophy. When he shifted to address that approach, we moved to technical specifications. Just as he started demonstrating his technical knowledge, we pivoted to discussing long-term partnership vision. We weren't being difficult or wasting time. Each topic was genuinely relevant to the deal, but by refusing to follow the expected negotiation rhythm, we maintained psychological advantage throughout the process. He could never settle into a comfortable strategy because he couldn't predict what type of conversation he'd need to have next. The result was a deal that exceeded our initial targets by 30%. Here's what makes this principle so powerful in personal relationships as well. When someone believes they have your emotional patterns figured out, they stop investing the same level of attention and effort into the relationship. But when you maintain multiple dimensions, sometimes the supportive friend, sometimes the challenging intellectual, sometimes the fun companion, sometimes the serious advisor, you remain psychologically engaging over the long term. The ancient Egyptians encoded this wisdom into their depiction of Thoth because they understood that true power requires the ability to meet any situation from a position of strength. Sometimes wisdom appears as the patient ibis, carefully observing before acting. Sometimes it manifests as the fierce baboon, ready to defend truth against deception. The form changes, but the essential power remains constant. Your assignment is to identify the 3 most predictable patterns in your current behavior and deliberately vary them over the next 2 weeks. Notice how differently people respond to you when they can't anticipate exactly what type of interaction they're going to have. But remember, you're not becoming someone else. You're revealing the full spectrum of who you already are, strategically and consciously, rather than unconsciously limiting yourself to a narrow, predictable range. This is how you build an aura that commands attention rather than demanding it, and why those who master the metamorphosis principle find themselves wielding influence that seems to operate almost magically. Because in a world of predictable people, The one who cannot be categorized becomes impossible to ignore. Watch someone with real power enter a room. They don't announce themselves. They don't perform for attention. They simply arrive, and the entire energy shifts. This isn't coincidence, it's the mastery of what Thoth understood better than any deity in the Egyptian pantheon, that true authority speaks before you ever open your mouth. Here's what's fascinating about Thoth's mythology. Despite being the god of speech, writing, and communication, he's consistently depicted in ancient art as still, contemplative, measured, never rushing, never gesticulating wildly, never appearing to chase anything or anyone. The scribes who carved his image understood something profound, that the most powerful communication happens in the spaces between words, in the weight of presence itself. You've felt this before, even if you didn't recognize it. Think about the last time you encountered someone whose mere presence changed your behavior. Maybe you found yourself speaking more carefully, sitting up straighter, or feeling like you needed to prove something. They didn't demand this, their stillness did. Their controlled energy created a gravitational field that pulled your attention and respect without effort. This is what I call psychological weight, and it's the opposite of everything our culture teaches about charisma. We're sold this idea that magnetic people are animated, expressive, always on. But watch the most powerful figures throughout history. They move as if the world can wait. They speak as if their words carry consequences. They maintain a neutral expression that reveals nothing while absorbing everything. Most people are psychological lightweights. They fidget because silence makes them uncomfortable. They overshare because they fear being misunderstood. They smile by default because they're seeking approval. They move constantly because stillness feels like vulnerability. But this restless energy actually broadcasts weakness. It signals that you're reactive, needy, desperate to fill every void with performance. Thoth's secret was understanding that stillness is unsettling to others precisely because it's so rare. When you can sit comfortably in silence while others squirm, you're demonstrating a level of self-containment that most people have never developed. You're operating on a different frequency, and others sense this immediately. Here's the psychological mechanism at work. When people encounter someone who doesn't telegraph their thoughts through constant micro-expressions and fidgeting, their minds go into overdrive trying to read the situation. Humans are wired to predict and categorize others for survival, so when you present as unreadable, you create a cognitive vacuum that others feel compelled to fill. Let me give you a specific example. In ancient Egyptian diplomatic records, there are accounts of foreign ambassadors meeting with high priests of Thoth's temples. These priests were trained in what the texts call the discipline of sacred pause. They would let questions hang in the air for long moments before responding, not from uncertainty, but from power. The ambassadors invariably began elaborating, explaining, sometimes even contradicting their original positions, all because they couldn't tolerate the weight of that measured silence. This same principle works today. When you respond immediately to every question, you signal that you're reactive, that your thoughts are surface level, that you're eager to please. But when you pause, really pause before speaking, you communicate that your words carry weight, that you're accessing something deeper than reflexive responses. The default expression is crucial here. Most people's faces are open books, broadcasting their internal state moment by moment. They smile when they want approval, frown when they're confused, look excited when they want to fit in. But these reactive expressions actually diminish your psychological presence because they make you predictable. The alternative isn't to look serious or stern, that's just another form of performance. True neutral expression is like still water. It reflects without revealing. It invites projection without providing easy answers. People look at you and wonder what you're thinking, what you know, what you're capable of. Your body language needs to match this energy. The deliberate walk that says, I'm not chasing anything because everything I need comes to me. The composed posture that isn't rigid or military, but radiates the kind of control that comes from deep self-awareness. Hands that don't gesture unnecessarily, that move only when movement serves a purpose. Here's a practical exercise you can start today, the pause practice. Before responding to any question or comment, count 3 full seconds in your head. Let the silence do work. Watch how others react to this space. You'll notice them becoming more attentive, more invested in your eventual response. You're training them to value your words by making those words less freely available. The observation stance is equally powerful. When you enter any social situation, spend the first few minutes scanning the room, not like you're seeking approval or looking for someone to talk to, but like you're measuring, assessing, gathering information. This creates the impression that you operate from a position of choice rather than need. Energy conservation is the third pillar. Most people leak energy constantly through unnecessary movements, reactive expressions, and verbal overflow. But when you move and speak only when it serves a purpose, others sense that your energy is contained, focused, potentially dangerous if directed at them. This isn't about being cold or antisocial. It's about understanding that mystery creates magnetism. When people can't immediately categorize you, when your thoughts and intentions remain partially hidden, when your presence feels heavier than your words, you become infinitely more interesting than someone who broadcasts everything. The historical record is full of figures who mastered this principle. Think about how leaders like Churchill or de Gaulle commanded rooms not through constant chatter but through measured presence. How figures like Cleopatra, who was actually trained in Egyptian mystery traditions that descended from Thoth's priesthood, used strategic silence as effectively as any speech. Start with one practice this week. Let silence do your work. In conversations, meetings, even casual interactions, give your words space to breathe. Watch how this simple shift changes not just how others perceive you, but how you perceive yourself. You'll discover that the most powerful thing you can say is often nothing at all. I need to tell you something that's going to fundamentally shift how you think about your own worth. Thoth understood a principle that most people today have completely forgotten, a principle that's costing you power, influence, and respect every single day. In the ancient texts, Thoth wasn't just wandering around ancient Egypt handing out wisdom to anyone who asked. The god of knowledge, the keeper of divine secrets, operated according to a strict economy of access. You had to prove yourself worthy. You had to demonstrate readiness. You had to earn the right to receive what he had to offer. And here's what that teaches us. Power that is easy to access is power that is easy to ignore. Think about your own life right now. How available are you? When someone texts you, how quickly do you respond? When people need, how available are you? Are you always there? When invitations come, do you always say yes? If you're like most people, you've turned yourself into the human equivalent of a convenience store open 24/7, always accessible, perpetually available for anyone who needs something. You've made yourself cheap. I don't mean that as an insult. I mean it as an economic reality. In any market, whether we're talking about diamonds, real estate, or human attention, scarcity drives value. Abundance destroys it. This isn't opinion. It's how human psychology works at the most fundamental level. Your brain right now is processing thousands of pieces of information, but which ones get your attention? The rare ones, the unexpected ones, the things that don't happen every day. Your mind literally filters out what's common and focuses on what's scarce. This filtering system developed over millions of years because paying attention to the unusual could mean the difference between survival and death. The same mechanism that makes you notice a shooting star while ignoring the thousands of regular stars applies to how people perceive you. When you're always available, always responsive, always accommodating, you become part of the background noise of their existence. But here's where most people get this wrong. They think the solution is to play hard to get, some manipulative game where you pretend to be busy or act disinterested. That's not what I'm talking about. That's fake scarcity, and people can sense it from a mile away. What I'm describing is genuine selectivity. It's becoming someone who truly has better things to do. Someone whose time and attention are genuinely valuable because they're invested in meaningful pursuits. Remember what we discussed about silence commanding attention. This is the economic principle behind that phenomenon. When Thoth spoke, his words carried weight because he wasn't constantly chattering. When he appeared, his presence mattered because he wasn't always hanging around. Let me give you some concrete examples of how this works in the modern world. Stop responding to messages instantly. I'm not saying ignore people or be rude. I'm saying that immediate responses train people to expect immediate access to you. When you respond within minutes every time, you're teaching everyone in your life that your attention is cheap and your time isn't valuable. Start building in delays. Let messages sit for hours, sometimes days. Respond when it's convenient for you, not when it's convenient for them. Stop showing up everywhere. You don't need to attend every social gathering, accept every invitation, or participate in every group activity. Your presence should feel like a gift, not a guarantee. When you do show up, people should feel fortunate that you chose to be there. Stop being predictable. If people can always count on you to say yes, to be available, to accommodate their needs, then your agreement becomes worthless. It's expected. But when your time and attention are genuinely limited, when people have to earn your yes, suddenly that agreement becomes valuable. Here's a story that illustrates this perfectly. I know someone who transformed their entire social dynamic simply by becoming less available. Instead of always being the person who organized gatherings, who reached out first, who made sure everyone felt included, they stopped initiating contact and waited to see who would reach out to them. The results were fascinating. Some relationships faded, and those were relationships where they were doing all the work anyway. But the relationships that remained became deeper, more genuine, and more balanced. People started valuing their time because they had to work for it. This principle extends into professional settings too. The consultant who's always available for meetings gets paid less than the one whose calendar is booked solid. The employee who stays late every night gets taken for granted, while the one who maintains boundaries gets respected. The expert who shares everything freely gets ignored, while the one who parcels out insights strategically gets sought after. But here's the sophisticated part that most people miss. This isn't about being antisocial or unkind. It's about resource management. Your attention, your time, your emotional energy, these are finite resources. When you give them away freely to everyone, you have nothing left for the people and pursuits that actually matter. Think about it this way. Would you rather have the casual interest of 100 people or the deep respect of 10? Would you rather be someone's convenient option or their valued priority? The digital world has made this problem exponentially worse. Social media has trained us to be constantly available, constantly responding, constantly seeking approval through likes and comments. We've created a generation of people who are literally addicted to giving themselves away for free. But you can use this to your advantage. In a world where everyone is desperately available, strategic unavailability becomes a superpower. When everyone else is posting constantly, your occasional appearance carries more weight. When everyone else responds immediately, your delayed response suggests you have better things to do. I'm not talking about becoming a hermit or treating people badly. I'm talking about becoming someone whose attention feels earned rather than expected. Someone who shows up fully when they do engage, but makes that engagement feel special because it's not constant. Here's what happens when you implement this correctly. People start paying attention when you speak because they know you don't waste words. They value your presence because they can't take it for granted. They respect your opinions because you don't share them carelessly. You become the ghost that governs the room even in your absence. People wonder what you think, what you're doing, when you'll appear next. The ancient Egyptians understood that the gods were powerful precisely because they were not constantly accessible. Thoth's wisdom was valuable because it was rare. His attention was meaningful because it was selective. You need to start thinking of yourself as a limited resource rather than an unlimited one. Your time, attention, and energy are not renewable on demand. They're precious commodities that should be invested wisely, not scattered carelessly to anyone who asks. This shift in thinking changes everything. It changes how you respond to requests, how you structure your time, how you engage in relationships, and ultimately, how others perceive and treat you. You stop being taken for granted because you stop making yourself constantly available to be taken for granted. The goal isn't to become cold or distant. The goal is to become valuable. And value, in human psychology as in economics, is always determined by scarcity relative to demand. You walk into a room, and within minutes, the entire atmosphere shifts. Conversations quiet down. People start glancing your way. The energy that was scattered and chaotic suddenly has a center point. This isn't chance, this is environmental mastery, and it's exactly what Thoth understood about controlling reality itself. See, Thoth wasn't just the god of knowledge and communication. Ancient texts describe him as the one who could alter the fundamental fabric of any space or situation. He didn't adapt to the world around him, he reshaped it to match his will. And here's what most people completely miss. You can do the same thing, because the mechanics behind this aren't mystical. They're psychological, and they're devastatingly effective. Most people walk into a room and immediately start reading the energy, then adjusting themselves to fit in. They match the volume level, mirror the mood, follow the conversational flow. But you don't adapt, you infect. You become the standard that everyone else unconsciously measures themselves against. This works because of something psychologists call emotional contagion. Humans are wired to unconsciously mirror the most emotionally stable person in any group. We evolved this way for survival in dangerous situations. You want to follow whoever seems most calm and in control, because they're probably seeing something you're missing. That same mechanism is still running in every conference room, dinner party, and family gathering you'll ever attend. Think about the last meeting you sat through where everyone was stressed and talking over each other. Now imagine one person who sits back, completely relaxed, scanning the room like they're measuring rather than seeking. What happens? The frantic energy starts to feel excessive. People begin to tone themselves down without even realizing why. That person becomes the emotional thermostat, and everyone else adjusts to their temperature. Here's how you become that person. When you enter any space, spend the first 30 seconds doing an energy assessment. Don't look for where you fit, look for what needs to be shifted. Is the room too chaotic, too tense, too scattered? Once you've identified the prevailing energy, you become its opposite in strategic ways. If everyone's talking loudly and rapidly, you speak quietly and pause between sentences. If the group is anxious and fidgety, you sit perfectly still with your hands relaxed. If people are avoiding eye contact and looking down, you maintain steady, comfortable eye contact with whoever's speaking. You're not being contrarian, you're providing balance, and people will gravitate toward that balance like they're magnetically pulled. The contrast technique works because it's unnatural in our hyperactive culture. Most people are so used to matching energy that when they encounter someone who doesn't, it makes them uncomfortable in a way that forces attention. They start projecting meaning onto your stillness, your calm, your deliberate pace. They assume you know something they don't, and honestly, you do. You know how to control your own emotional state regardless of external chaos. Let's get specific about different environments. In business meetings, you establish environmental control by arriving slightly early and choosing your seat strategically, not at the head of the table where you're obviously trying to dominate, but somewhere you can see everyone's faces. When the meeting starts, you let others jump in with their immediate reactions while you observe. Then, when you do speak, you address the room as if you've already conquered the conversation. Your body language says you're measuring everyone else's contributions against some internal standard they can't see. In social gatherings, environmental mastery looks different. You don't work the room, you let the room come to you. You position yourself where you can see the flow of conversations, and you end interactions with purpose rather than lingering until they naturally fade. People start to notice that talking to you feels different from talking to everyone else, more focused, more intentional. Family situations are where this gets really interesting, because family members think they know exactly who you are and how you'll react. When you start responding from a place of environmental control instead of emotional reaction, it disrupts their entire script. If family dinners usually devolve into chaos, you remain the calm center. If someone tries to push your buttons, you respond with curiosity instead of defensiveness. That's an interesting perspective. What makes you see it that way? Watch how quickly the dynamic shifts when you refuse to play your assigned role. Now, here's what happens when someone challenges your environmental control. They'll try to dominate through ego, humor, or status. The amateur response is to compete directly to get louder, funnier, or more impressive. But that's not how environmental mastery works. Instead, you let them overexpose themselves while you remain composed. When someone's trying too hard to command attention, your stillness makes their effort look desperate by comparison. If someone interrupts you, you don't fight for the floor. You pause, let them finish, then continue exactly where you left off as if the interruption was irrelevant. If someone tries to one-up your story, you respond with genuine interest in theirs, which makes their competitive energy look petty next to your confidence. The anchor method is your most powerful tool here. In any group dynamic, you establish yourself as the stable reference point that others can unconsciously rely on. When emotions run high, you remain steady. When confusion spreads, you stay clear. When people start talking in circles, you ask the question that cuts through to what actually matters. This isn't about being cold or detached, it's about being unaffected by external chaos while maintaining internal stability. People don't follow reason, they follow energy. And whoever controls the energy controls the outcomes. The beautiful thing about environmental mastery is that it compounds. The more you practice being the emotional thermostat in small situations, the more naturally it emerges in bigger ones. You start to notice that meetings go differently when you're there. Conflicts resolve more quickly. Groups make decisions more efficiently. You're not manipulating people, you're providing the stability that allows everyone to function at their best. But remember Thoth's deeper wisdom. True environmental control comes from understanding that you're not separate from the space you're in, you're part of its fabric. When you master your own energy completely, reshaping any room becomes as natural as breathing. In the grand temple inscriptions of ancient Egypt, you'll notice something fascinating about Thoth's depiction. While other gods are shown commanding armies or sitting on thrones, Thoth appears in the background holding the scales of judgment, recording the words that shape reality, standing silent beside the pharaoh's ear. The Egyptians understood something we've forgotten. The most powerful force in any system isn't the one giving obvious commands. It's the intelligence that sets the standards everyone else unconsciously follows. This is what I call silent tyranny, and it's the most sophisticated form of influence that exists. You're not ruling through force or manipulation. You're becoming the gravitational center that others naturally orbit around, often without realizing they're doing it. Think about how this actually works in your daily experience. In any group, there's usually one person whose energy level becomes the group's energy level. When they're excited, everyone gets energized. When they're calm, the whole room settles. When they're focused, suddenly everyone else starts paying attention. This person rarely announces their leadership, they just embody it so completely that others can't help but calibrate themselves to their frequency. The psychological mechanism behind this is called social referencing. Humans are constantly scanning their environment for cues about appropriate behavior, emotional tone, and social standards. We take these cues from whoever appears most confident and composed, most certain of their place in the world. When you develop this kind of presence, you become the standard others measure themselves against, even when you're not actively trying to influence them. Here's where it gets really interesting. True silent tyranny extends beyond your physical presence. People who've been in your orbit long enough internalize your standards and preferences. They start making decisions based on what they think you would approve of, even when you're not there. Your influence becomes a phantom presence in their decision-making process. I learned this principle watching a master craftsman in Italy. He never raised his voice, never gave direct orders to his apprentices. Instead, he simply maintained an unwavering standard in his own work. When something wasn't quite right, he wouldn't criticize, he'd just quietly redo it himself, demonstrating the correct approach. Within weeks, his apprentices were holding themselves to his standards without any explicit instruction. His expectations had become their internal compass. The key to developing this level of influence lies in 3 sophisticated techniques. First is expectation setting through embodiment. Instead of telling people what you expect, you demonstrate it through your own behavior. Your punctuality becomes their punctuality. Your attention to detail becomes their attention to detail. Your emotional composure becomes their emotional reference point. The second technique is strategic withdrawal. When someone falls short of the standard you've established, you don't confront them directly. Instead, you simply withdraw your energy not as punishment, but as natural consequence. This withdrawal feels organic rather than manipulative because it mirrors how energy actually works in nature. Water doesn't argue with the stone, it simply flows around it. The third technique is what I call the mirror method. Your reactions become so minimal and composed that people start seeing their own conscience reflected back at them. When someone is being dishonest, you don't accuse them, your calm presence makes them feel their own dishonesty more acutely. When someone is being petty, your steady energy highlights their pettiness without you saying a word. This approach works because it aligns with how humans naturally want to feel. Chaos is exhausting. Uncertainty is draining. When you become a source of steady, composed energy, people are drawn to align with you because it feels better than resistance. They're not being coerced, they're choosing the path of least internal friction. Watch how this manifests in professional environments. The person who truly runs the office is often not the one with the biggest title. It's the person whose standards become team standards, whose work ethic becomes the benchmark, whose approval everyone quietly seeks. They don't need to give orders because their presence shapes the entire culture around them. In social situations, this person becomes the emotional thermostat for the group. Their comfort level with silence makes others comfortable with silence. Their depth of conversation elevates everyone else's conversation. Their boundaries become everyone's boundaries, not through enforcement, but through natural adoption. The most advanced practitioners of this influence learn to lead through questions and strategic silence. Instead of telling people what to think, they ask questions that guide people toward their own realizations. Instead of filling every pause with words, they let silence do the work of emphasis and reflection. Here's the crucial distinction. This isn't manipulation because you're not trying to get people to do things that serve you at their expense. You're becoming such a clear embodiment of higher standards that others naturally want to rise to meet them. The influence feels good to those experiencing it because it calls out their own excellence. The responsibility that comes with this level of influence is immense. When people are calibrating themselves to your energy, your internal state becomes their external environment. Your integrity becomes their moral compass. Your emotional regulation becomes their sense of safety. This is why Thoth was depicted as the keeper of divine law, not because he enforced it through punishment, but because his very nature was so aligned with cosmic order that others naturally organized themselves around his presence. He didn't need to command respect. Respect was the inevitable response to his embodied wisdom. The path to this level of influence begins with becoming impeccable in your own standards, not for others to see, but because excellence is your natural state. When you stop trying to control others and start mastering yourself so completely that your presence becomes magnetic, you discover what the ancients knew. The most powerful rulers never need to announce their authority, others simply recognize it and willingly submit to its gravitational pull. Here's the fundamental truth that Thoth understood and the modern world has forgotten. Real power isn't about commanding others, it's about becoming the kind of person around whom favorable outcomes naturally occur. You don't chase influence, you become someone so centered in your own authority that influence gravitates toward you. Think about it this way. When you walk into a room trying to impress people, everyone feels it. There's an energy of need, of seeking approval, that actually repels the very respect you're trying to earn. But when you enter that same room completely comfortable with who you are, requiring nothing from anyone, something shifts. People lean in. Conversations pause. You become what I call the gravitational center, not because you're performing, but because you've stopped performing. This is what we've been building toward through everything we've covered. The strategic opacity, the controlled metamorphosis, the commanding silence, your mastery of attention economics, environmental control, and invisible influence. These aren't separate techniques you deploy. They're expressions of a fundamental shift in how you exist in the world. Let me give you the integration framework that ties this all together. At the core level, you're developing what ancient texts called presence without effort. This means your very being communicates authority, mystery, and value without you having to announce it. When you've truly internalized strategic opacity, people don't see you as secretive, they see you as someone who operates on a different level. Your controlled metamorphosis isn't about changing personalities, it's about revealing different facets of a complex, intriguing character that people can never fully figure out. Your commanding silence becomes natural because you genuinely have nothing to prove. You're not withholding words to create an effect, you're simply someone who speaks only when your words add real value. The attention economics we discussed transforms from a strategy into an authentic expression of someone who values their time and energy too much to scatter it carelessly. Here's where most people stumble. They try to implement these principles as techniques, as things they do, but Thoth's wisdom goes deeper. These become things you are. The environmental control we explored isn't about manipulating spaces, it's about naturally elevating any environment you enter, because your standards are so clear and consistent that others unconsciously rise to meet them. The invisible influence happens because you've become someone worth following, not because you're trying to lead. People align with your energy because it represents something stable and powerful in an uncertain world. Now, let's talk about the mindset shifts that make this transformation possible. The first shift is from seeking approval to commanding respect. When you need people to like you, you give away your power in every interaction. You adjust, accommodate, diminish yourself to fit their expectations. But when you operate from a place of self-respect so solid that external validation becomes irrelevant, something remarkable happens. People start treating you with the same respect you show yourself. The second shift moves you from trying to be liked to being valued. Likeable people are pleasant, agreeable, forgettable. Valuable people are irreplaceable. They bring something unique to every situation. They solve problems others can't solve, see angles others miss, maintain standards others admire. You become valuable not by trying to please everyone, but by developing yourself into someone whose presence genuinely improves situations. The third shift transforms you from chasing attention to attracting it naturally. When you stop competing for notice and start focusing on becoming genuinely interesting through your experiences, your insights, your unique perspective on the world, attention finds you. You become someone people want to be around not because you're entertaining them, but because they feel more interesting when they're with you. These principles compound in ways that create an upward spiral of influence. As you become more unreadable, people become more curious about you. As you become more selectively available, your time becomes more precious. As you develop greater environmental influence, people start looking to you to set the tone. This changing treatment from others reinforces your development and accelerates your growth. But let's address the challenges, because they're real. Standing out feels uncomfortable when you've spent years blending in. There's a gravitational pull back toward people-pleasing behaviors, especially when you encounter resistance or confusion from others who are used to the old version of you. And this transformation requires patience. Real presence develops over months and years, not days and weeks. Here are your specific next steps. Daily, practice what I call presence anchoring. Take 3 moments throughout your day to pause, breathe deeply, and consciously embody the energy you want to project. Weekly, Implement one small change that increases your mystery or scarcity. Maybe you stop explaining your decisions, or you become less immediately available for non-essential requests. Monthly, assess your environmental influence. Are spaces different because you're in them? Are conversations more substantial? Are people looking to you more often for direction or opinion? Success in this isn't measured by obvious dominance or making others uncomfortable. It's measured by subtle shift, the way conversations change when you enter a room, the increasing respect you notice in people's voices, the way others start seeking your perspective on important matters. Real kings don't need thrones. Their authority is recognized instinctively, felt rather than declared. The long-term vision here is profound. You become someone whose very existence elevates the quality of any environment. Your standards naturally become shared standards. Your energy creates an atmosphere where everyone performs at their best. This isn't about controlling others, it's about becoming so centered in your own authority that others naturally want to align with your energy. Remember, this power comes with responsibility. Use it for elevation, not manipulation. The goal isn't to diminish others, but to inspire them to rise to their own highest potential. When you master these principles, you become a source of stability and strength that others can rely on, a gravitational force that brings out the best in everyone around you. If this video resonated with you, let us know by commenting. I understood it.